Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for the Oregon Employment Department Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting for unemployment insurance. We'll get started in just a few minutes. In the meantime, we'll post instructions for accessing the simultaneous interpretation. I just want to give a few more minutes for others to join. Alrighty, looks like we're ready to get started. So, welcome to the Oregon Employment Department's Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Unemployment Insurance. Today is Monday, October 13th, 2025, and it's about 10 o'clock. This meeting is now in session and it is being recorded to create an official record. My name is Lindsay Leahy, and I'm the Unemployment Insurance Division Director here at the Employment Department. If you would like to view the simultaneous interpretation of today's session, first, click the interpretation box from the menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. Or you might have to click the More button in order to see it. Then choose your preferred language. The presenter's voice will be lowered while the interpreter speaks over it, but you can choose to mute the presenter if you prefer. This meeting is also being interpreted in American Sign Language. Those interpreters will be highlighted on your screen. We'll also put these instructions into chat. Everyone's microphones are currently deactivated except for the RAC members and OED staff. RAC members and OED staff, if you need to step away for a moment during the meeting, please be sure to mute your microphone. For everyone else observing the meeting today, please only use the chat feature if you are having technical issues. Our team may put information in the chat for your reference as we go along. Today's RAC meeting is scheduled to run until 12 o'clock p.m. RAC meetings are open to the public, and we may take public comment at the end if time allows. Additionally, we also accept written comments from the public and committee members through the end of the day tomorrow. And later, we will touch on how written comments can be provided. After all RAC member feedback is reviewed by the OED team and any changes are made as appropriate, we will move forward with the formal rulemaking process, which will include a public hearing. Now, this is our second meeting to discuss all the proposed changes. The first meeting was held on October 2nd. Before we review today's agenda, I'd like to kick things off by asking our committee members to introduce themselves. Let's just go alphabetically, following the order on the slide, starting with Susan Allen. Susan, can you start us off?
Sure. Thank you for having me this morning. My name is Susan Allen. I represent Oregon AFSCME. My pronouns are she, her, and I appreciate this opportunity to give feedback.
Thank you, Susan. Cynthia?
Hello, everybody. My name is Cynthia Bronger Munoz, and I am here with Oregon Education Association, or OEA, and we are happy to participate in this RAC.
Great. Robert Camarillo?
Good morning, Lindsay. Robert Camarillo, Oregon State Building Trades Unions. And I'll be taking this meeting today from my car. We had a power outage in our office this morning,
No.
so I'll do my best.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. And then Amanda, I'm not sure if Amanda was able to make it today. It looks like not. We'll move to Jenny. Looks like Jenny might also be out today. Stacy.
Yeah, hi all. It's Stacy Michelson here with the Oregon School Boards Association. Thanks for pulling us back together.
Thanks, Stacy. And then Andy isn't here today, but Allison is here. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Allison Asarno, representing hospitals, and Andy was helping me out last time. I work at Kaiser Permanente.
Thank you so much, Allison. Paloma.
Good morning, Paloma Sparks, Oregon Business and Industry.
Thanks, Paloma. Katie.
Morning, Katie Tyson, she, her with the Oregon AFL-CIO, the State Labor Federation.
Great. And Robert Westerman.
Good morning, Robert Westerman. Please call me Bob so there's no confusion with the other Robert on the call. I represent International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Local Union 932, with jurisdiction along the Oregon coast.
Thank you so much, Bob. All right, we also have some OED staff on hand to help run the meeting and also answer questions. That includes the UI Division Deputy Director for Benefits, Sarah Cromwell. We weren't sure if Sarah was going to be here today, so she's not on the slide, but she is here. The UI Division Deputy Director for Operations and Policy, Lisa Schriever, and UI Legislative Coordinator, Justin Freeman. Communications Officer, Seth Gordon, will be our moderator today and also running the Zoom meeting. And also with us are Stephanie Basin and Monica Reyna Dunnigan. So I'd like to note one change to the rulemaking calendar since our last meeting, as we now expect to file the proposed rule changes with the Oregon Secretary of State on October 24th. So the public comment period, public hearing, tentative filing date, and the effective date of the rule remains the same. It's just the filing date moved so that we could have this second meeting today. So, to recap our initial meeting just briefly, we discussed proposed changes to OAR 471.010.0105 sub 4 regarding informed consent. We also talked about OAR 471.030.0050 sub 3 regarding benefit payments, and most of our time was spent discussing proposed changes to our weekly eligibility rule, which is OAR 471.030.0036. We did run out of time and we're unable to discuss section 5, subsection D. So that's where we're going to go ahead and start our discussion today. So this change is related to the implementation of Senate Bill 916, which will allow unemployment insurance benefits for striking workers beginning in January of 2026. After that, we will continue our discussion about the other sections of the weekly eligibility rule before going over the draft filing paperwork, including the fiscal impact of the changes. And just a note on the agenda, we might, depending on time, swap those two so we make sure to get to the paperwork today. We'll finish up if there's time with roundtable and then with viewer questions and comments again, if time allows. So for everyone watching the meeting online, we again ask that you only use the chat feature if you are having technical issues. Our team will put links and information in the chat for your reference as we go along today. So those links will include the Employment Department Administrative Rules page, where you can find summaries of the proposed changes, our video from the October 2nd meeting, and today's meeting materials. As a reminder, questions and comments can also be submitted via email to rules@employ.oregon.gov. All right, so let's jump into the proposed rule changes. Thank you. So starting with section 5, subsection D, this is a proposed update to the actively seeking work requirement specifically for striking workers. It is similar to the approach that we took for employer attached individuals and that we talked about at our last meeting, and how other states with similar statutory programs for striking workers address the requirement of actively seeking work for those claimants. So I'll just go through it. So D, they are unemployed, the claimants that being what we're referring to there, as of January 1st, 2026, due to the labor dispute as described under ORS 657-200. And A, they are not separated from their employer. B, there is an expectation that they will return to work for their employer when the labor dispute ends. C, they are capable of accepting and reporting for suitable work with that employer. D, they remain in contact with that employer unless contact is prohibited by the union. And E, they remain in contact with the union, or 5E, which then goes into kind of regular work search requirements as directed by employees of the employment department. So I do want to note that the actively seeking work requirement is different than separation from employment or a job refusal. So if a striking worker is offered a job from their current employer or from another employer during the strike, the department would look at the suitability of that job offer. If the work isn't suitable, the work offer isn't suitable, it would be reasonable that the claimant would turn down that offer of work and benefits would continue. However, if the job offer was suitable, the claimant who turned down that offer would likely end up with a denial of benefits. So, suitability of a job offer is determined by the employment department. It's not determined by the worker or the employer. The proposed requirement for actively seeking work is also different than if a worker refuses to return to work after a strike. Well, that could be a job refusal. It could also be a separation from employment, like a voluntary quit or a discharge, both of which would be issues that we would need to adjudicate under that applicable part of the law. And it could lead to the claimant being disqualified from benefits if the job refusal or separation was disqualifying. So just wanted to kind of clear up that those are items that are addressed, but just not in this rule. And this is different. It's just about the actively seeking work piece. So with that, I'll go ahead and open up for comments and questions from our committee. Alrighty, and I don't know who had their hand up first, but I'll go with Katie is first on my screen, and then Susan.
Thanks, Lindsay. I am just hoping before we kind of get into the meat of this a little bit more, I think it would be helpful if you could kind of talk through a little bit the change from the, like why the change from the listening sessions to this language. And then I think in particular, if you can say a little bit more and maybe like work through some scenarios on what it will mean they were not separated from their employer. Because I'm just wondering if maybe there needs to be a few more words there to kind of match the intent, or if I'm off base.
Sure. Thank you, Katie. So changes from the listening session. So we heard some confusion and generally that folks wanted more detail here. So the language that we had during the listening sessions just sort of referred to, the language that was above. And so we just kind of copied and pasted so it was more clear if you're a striking worker and you're just looking at this section, you don't have to refer up to the prior language. It's just kind of all in here. And so just thought maybe the bulleted list, the A, B, C, D, E would be easier to follow was sort of the thought process behind that. And then you asked about separated from work. And so just wanting clarification about, so here we're looking at, we're considering that these folks, again, haven't separated. So they are, unemployed due to the strike, but they're still attached to that employer. They're still looking to return to work with that employer. Now, sometimes during a strike, either just before, sort of in the paperwork, people can be separated, or sometimes during the strike or immediately after. Related to or unrelated to the strike. People might be laid off or fired or discharged for other reasons, or they might just quit their job. So that is adjudicated under separation rule, not under this weekly availability sort of thing. So there isn't language here about that because it's in a different area. But I just wanted to clarify that here because that has come up as a question a lot. Like, well, what happens if they refuse to come back after the strike? Well, that would be either a job, depending on the nature of it, which we would investigate, ask the claimant what happened, ask the employer what happened. It would either be, a job refusal or a work separation, and then we would adjudicate it under that part of the law. Does that help?
Yes, that does help. And I do think on this language, any more in terms of they were not separated from their employer, any language that gets more to what you just said, right? Maybe it's like either the sort of the inverse, they are still employer attached in that phraseology, or they are temporarily separated from their employer. Because I think what I heard you just say, right, is like versus if they're permanently separated from their employer, like they got fired or left like the week before, right?
And so what I'm looking at, under strike, they're not separated at all. They're still employer attached. They're just unemployed because of the strike. So no separation has occurred. But there are occasions where people are laid off. So they might have a situation where, uh, they a unit has been laid off completely, permanently separated, and another, striking unit or another set of workers might be on strike. So sometimes that paperwork can all come in around the same time. So a separation is very different than how we're looking at striking workers. So the folks that were laid off permanently or temporarily, if we're looking at like they were laid off for, a few weeks, and the intent is to bring them back, say if there was a plant closure or something like that. That is a separation that has occurred, where this is no separation has occurred. So, but what I'm hearing you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, under A, you'd like to just kind of finesse that language a little bit more.
Yeah, because I think what you're saying is like a labor dispute means inherently that they are not separated from their employer, which we would agree. And so maybe it's
Yeah.
like, I get confused in that it's D and like an additional qualification, right? They were not separated for their employer versus like, you're trying to describe the situation of a labor dispute, and I'm reading it as a labor dispute and all these other things, right?
Okay. Thank you. I'll take that back.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. Susan.
Well, it looks like there's a lot of interest in this particular thread of conversation. So if you would like, I can defer my thought, which has to do with down into the ABCDE, and come back to where it, or I can address it now, whichever you prefer.
Um, Now is fine, and then, I can move
Okay.
it if depending on what the question is. But
Okay,
thank you
great.
for
Um,
providing me the option.
Sure. I just feel like there a whole bunch of hands came up all at the same time. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to be part of the team. All right. So I just generally wanted to flag that sub D, they remain in contact with that employer unless contact is prohibited by the union. There is a lot of that is confusing, misleading, and not the perfect fit. And why that is, I just want to flag that. Um, First of all, it creates an open door for the employer. So individual striking workers during a strike, uh, they would have different there are sort of different rules that apply that have to do with PECBA. So it's important to recognize that it would be an unfair labor practice for either party, either the employer or the union, to stop communication with each other um, during the course of bargaining. At least that's my understanding. So while I think the spirit of this is to have some level of contact with the employer, I think that we should talk a little bit more about what that actually means and what is practicable based on PECBA.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, definitely we'll take that back. And I think as you got to the spirit of it is basically that they are ready to return to work as soon as um, uh, the strike ends. That they're not say going on vacation during the strike. Not that a lot of striking workers are going to do that, but that's sort of the say if you had a pre-planned family vacation that happened to occur during the strike, you've already put out all the money, you paid for the hotel, you can't refund stuff. You go on vacation during that week, you wouldn't be eligible because during that week you're on vacation. You're not able to return to work for your employer, you're not in contact with your union. And so that's sort of the intent behind that is that basically you're ready to go back to work as soon as it makes sense. And so we tried to add the E in there about employer union because we heard some stuff during the listing session. It's in other places that like, well, in some contracts or maybe in PECBA, they couldn't talk to the employer, that they could only talk through the union to make sure that we're not messing with the negotiations. And so that's how we were trying to kind of get at that language.
That
But
makes sense to me. My only response is that, of course, I named PECBA, which only is appropriate
yeah,
for public employees, but I
yeah,
think that this would also, my comments also would likely address non-public employees, and I continue to believe that some nuancing of the language, I'm hopeful that we can consider some nuancing there.
great. Thank you, Susan. Paloma.
Yeah, mine is also related to D. I mean, there could be contract provisions, NLRA requirements, PECBA requirements. I think it is a mistake to have in the union in this rule from the state agency, unless contact is prohibited by the union, because that leads to potential issue of the state is sort of specifically making a statement about the free speech opportunities of employees. So I would just say there's probably a better way to draft this with regards to that piece.
Thank you, Paloma. Stacy.
Yeah, thanks. I kind of have, I think, a couple of questions that I sort of feel like have maybe been answered as we've been talking, so you can just bear with me. I want to check in first for workers who are out on strike. Under C, I'm hearing that that is generally intended to be about whether they are actually around essentially able to, come back when the strike ends. And I want some, or I'm looking for some clarity and understanding there on my part, because, my understanding is when a lot of our, not a lot, but we don't have that many that go out on strike, but when our districts do go out on strike, folks are offered alternative work opportunities if should they choose not to strike. And so I guess I'm looking for like, what is that distinction? How is the department interpreting capable and capable of accepting and reporting for work if the nature of the dynamic is that the employer is going to offer work to anyone who would otherwise potentially be striking should they choose not to do that. I don't think the intent is to say you're not accepting that work, therefore you're not eligible, because that would defeat the purpose of the legislation, but I'm wanting to understand that a little bit better. That's question one.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and so that you're right in that C is about that, they're capable of accepting and reporting for suitable work, meaning they're not, on vacation, they're not way out of their labor market. They're able to actually return to work when we're called. The other piece you're talking about when they're offered, alternative work during the strike, that's where we look at that suitability piece. So we would look at what was the nature of the work offered? Do they have, the skills and experience to do that type of work? We look at the rate of pay that's offered. We look at, if there's any conditions that are being imposed. There's just our regular suitability of that job offer. And if we determine that that job offer is a suitable offer of work that is refused by the claimant, that could result in a denial of benefits. If we look at it and say, oh, that wasn't suitable for them, and it was okay for them to refuse, then benefits would continue. So that's something that we already do. That's already a part of our law, but that would
But I guess
yeah, go ahead.
My question there though is, I'm refusing work because I'm choosing to strike. Is my assumption is that given the legislation would be an acceptable reason for refusing work, but that isn't called out in this language. That's what I'm trying to get at. Because I also think, right, like there are folks who are not working because they are striking. And then my second question, which I'll get to, is about folks who may not be working because there is a strike happening, but they're not actively participating in the strike.
Sure. So if we're looking at, if say the employer were to offer the same job, so you're out on strike and you're like, but hey, please come back to work. Here is your current job. It is vacant. So it's vacant because of the strike. That wouldn't be a suitable offer of work because that's under the contract negotiation. So that's how we would look at it. I was thinking of more, we have these other vacancies over here that, aren't involved in the strike, but they're currently vacant. You might offer those type of jobs, and we would look at it and see, can they do that work, and is it per the CBA and other things, like does that, is it a suitable situation for them to accept that work?
That's really
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
go ahead. No, that's super helpful clarification.
Great.
And
And
then
then the
my
second
other,
question, yeah.
yeah, so the second question is, and I kind of feel like maybe I was hearing yeah, let me just check my understanding. So we've got folks who are out actively on strike, and then we may have, staff who opt not to go out on strike. In which case we've seen districts do some things like offer, you can continue lesson planning or what have you, and, we'll continue to pay you. If, however, that's not the case, and we have folks who, were unable to continue to offer work, or for example, if we have, teachers who are out on strike and that's impacting our ability to continue to provide employment for classified staff because we don't actually have kids in classrooms. For those folks who are out, I guess it's due to a work shortage, but the work shortage is due to the labor dispute.
Mhm.
Does that get evaluated under this chunk of language, or is that captured elsewhere?
So that's going to really be sort of case by case. So
Okay.
we would look at in the situation you're kind of describing. Let me make sure that I've got it straight in my head. So you've got like, because let's say the teachers go on strike, and because of that, there's just not enough for the other all of the other folks to do, or maybe just a particular portion of the staff can't come to work because there's just not enough work for them to do. Generally speaking, that's going to be a layoff due to lack of work because you don't have work for them to continue, even though the layoff is sort of triggered by the strike. They're not on strike, so it would just be the regular layoff rules that would apply to that situation.
Okay. And then I guess my slightly more specific within that, and maybe it is unnecessary, is if it's someone who's part of the same contract
Hmm.
generally, but they are not like a dues paying member of the union. Right. So if we're thinking teachers are out on strike, we have some teachers that we therefore don't have in, but they're not out striking themselves. Curious about how that requirement to remain in contact with the union might impact folks who are not actually members of the union in that case.
Yeah, that would really depend on like all the specific scenarios in that situation. So we would have to look at the contract and how those non-union members associate with the union, or if they're how that works. So we kind of have to determine that case by case. And in those situations, we would be in contact with with the employer or with the bargaining, just say like, what about these folks, and can we get copies of the contract? That's normal for us to look at right now with labor disputes, even though there's no UI. We look at what's the nature of the disagreement, what's the specific language, and all of that, and then we'd be able to provide specific guidance to those workers about what's expected for them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think next is Allison.
Yeah, I had raised my hand to make a really similar point to Paloma, so I just want to say that we had the same thoughts on that for D, but I also have a clarifying question about how does the department monitor whether someone is remaining in contact with the employer or the union? Like, how are we tracking that?
Generally, how we track that is just by folks telling us. So if people, are well, let's put it this way. So if the employer or union lets us know that individual, or sometimes the workers will tell us, that's usually how we investigate that, because we find out via self-reporting. So somebody tells us. When you're talking about like out of the labor market issues, or things where people like went on vacation, a lot of times again people tell us on their weekly certification. But we also have things like we monitor like IP addresses and where people are claiming from. So that might trigger an investigation for us to kind of look at like what's going on there. But generally it's self-reporting. Bob.
I've got a couple of questions or issues. I have issues with the way that D is written as well, but also the statement that the employer may make a offer of work to a striking worker. Seems to me that that would be an unfair labor practice under the NLRA, that they have a representative bargaining unit representative by the local union. The employer's communication should be directly to the local union. In making an offer of work to the individual, that may be negotiating individually when they should be talking to the bargaining unit representative. And then also just the concern that if it was allowed for them to make a return to work, that may require a member to cross a picket line for that employer, which my members would have, strong feelings about doing so if they were asked to do so. So I think that D should probably, it needs to be rewritten or come out. The striking workers should maintain contact with the union. They should be ready to go back to work immediately upon the strike being over. But any contact while they're on strike between the employer and the individual worker, I think is maybe unlawful.
Thank you, Bob. Cynthia.
My hand is up for exactly that same reason. The unless contract is prohibited by the union, I feel like if you're in a labor dispute, I should say, if you're in a labor dispute, then that means you're actively engaging in bargaining as a unit. So having folks remain in contact with the union wouldn't work, but having, unless the contact is prohibited by union, it gets a little messy. So anyway, so yes, another check mark behind that one.
Thank you. Susan.
Sue, you're muted.
Thank you. Susan Allen, Oregon AFSCME. Just wanted to circle back around to the scenario that I heard earlier regarding licensed versus classified educators. So what I thought I heard is that there would be some some edict if licensed folks or teachers who are licensed educators, if they went on strike. I think the question that was posed is how does that relate to classified workers who are in the same school district? And I would name that the number of days that they come in and how those classified staff come in would also be determined by their collective bargaining agreement, which would be separate, which may be separate and distinct from the licensed education workers. So that may or may not apply. So if there is a scenario where you have licensed staff that walk out, so if teachers go on strike, then the number of days and how the classified staff show up for work is entirely dictated by their own bargaining agreement, because in the 197 school districts in the state of Oregon, there are many where you have distinct collective bargaining agreements for licensed and classified. There are some that are wall to wall, which is the term that's used if one union represents all of the workers in a school district, but it is unusual. It's not the norm. So I just wanted to put that on the record.
Oh, I appreciate that, Susan. And to be clear, we would look at the specific, situation, who is striking, who isn't, and what the nature of what's going on, case by case, because it's going to be, sometimes similar, but sometimes very unique to what's going on with that particular negotiation. And we're not talking about like the points of that you're negotiating on, but just the nature of the contract and what's going on in that particular situation. And so, as it was the scenario that, as I understood it, was there is a bargaining unit that is out on strike. There is another bargaining unit that can't work because there's not enough work to do. Because of the strike. But that second bargaining unit is not on strike. There's not work for them. So in our mind, bargaining unit 1, who is on strike, and bargaining unit 2, even though there's not work because of this other strike, they're not on strike, they're technically laid off because there is a lack of work for them to do for any reason. This particular one was the strike. There could be a situation where there's two strikes going on that have different terms, and then they would both be striking. I mean, there's lots of different permutations of that. But that was why I answered the way that I did. I hope that helps.
I think that makes sense. The only thing that
Okay.
I just would name is there's over a 1,000 titles of classified staff in the state of Oregon, and many of them literally have to do with the workings of the
Mhm.
facility. So a lot of those folks have to do that same work, regardless
Yeah.
if there are children in the school or not.
Yeah. Okay. That totally makes sense. Thank you. Katie.
Thanks all. So I wanted to pick up on Sue's thought and then maybe like continue to drill into like some potential alternate language, and like the certified smart people haven't done it. So this is a little bit of just an open conversation, like wanted to get folks' feedback, not married to it. But I will say, and some of you have heard me say this before, maybe to just like level set, just put on the record a little bit, I think what we would argue and what we have argued is during a labor disputes, workers really want to actively return to work. It's just under the suitable conditions, right? Whether that's safety, whether that's family supporting benefits and wages, right? And so, I think in some of these instances, maybe not all of the instances, but I think we'd probably argue that, for an employer to offer a different job, that suitability concerns might remain the same. There's also probably some labor concerns, like National Labor Relations Act concerns, as I think Bob kind of put on the record. So just wanted to get that out there. We can continue to dig in and think about it more. I'm curious because I heard general agreement that like the language in D is concerning across the board to folks. I do think maybe like one answer, and maybe I think you said this at one point, Lindsay, somewhere in there, maybe drilling in on a little more specificity on like what we're talking about when they are capable of accepting and reporting for suitable work means like they're not on vacation, they didn't have a pre-planned vacation, right? They're not out of the labor market. Like just drilling down on those things a little bit more in the language, I think could be helpful. And then on D, I first went to, maybe it's just that the worker is ready to return to work as soon as the labor dispute ends, right? I do think, Stacy, you brought up an interesting point on sort of like workers in various scenarios. So maybe a different or additional answer could be like, D, they remain in contact with, and then two bullets to indicate OARs, right? Their employer, if the claimant is not on strike, so like being as specific as that, or their union if the claimant is on strike. I'm like talked to many people about this, so also curious, just like everyone's thoughts on if that level of specificity, right, might be really helpful in these instances. So I'll stop talking.
Thanks, Katie. And to be clear with all of this, obviously we have to go through scenarios and how we would look at it, but very open to if you have suggested language, that you want us to talk about, like, let's get on that. That's part of why we're here today. So if you have a brilliant idea about how to reword some of this, do let us know so we can take that back and have our policy folks kind of dig into those suggestions too. So appreciate that. Thanks, Katie. Paloma.
Yeah, I just wanted one to clarify that it's all of these requirements that would have to be met,
Mhm.
correct? Okay. And then I think it needs to be clear that there's a time limit on this because of how the statute is written. So the mere fact that you're involved in a labor dispute isn't never ending. So that there are time limits on that. And then I'll just reiterate based on communication with USDOL and legislators and communication that we have had with USDOL, we believe that this violates the Social Security Act and have been told that there's an expectation that this is problematic. Just putting it on the record.
Yeah, thank you, Paloma. And thank you also for, sharing what you heard from the Department of Labor with us. That's extremely helpful. We have been working with the Department of Labor as well. And the folks we were talking to didn't have concerns, but that'll be an ongoing discussion. Obviously, we don't want to violate any of the Social Security Act or anything like that. So we can always make changes if we receive feedback directly from them with concerns. But I do appreciate that you sharing that. Robert.
And I'm back. I got power, Wi-Fi.
Yay!
I also wanted to just reinforce that idea about the reason why workers go on strike. I mean, it's to improve their situation with their current employer. So they're never going to be suitable to go back in another position. That's not why they go on strike. They're going on strike to speak out against whatever issues are happening in their current role. So their intent is always to return. Like that is the intent for the employee to return back to their position, but with improved conditions. And so I just wanted to also go on record and reinforce that. That's the whole intent of these workers going on strike. If you're not part of that bargaining unit, then I don't know how this would really apply. The intent is to provide these benefits for those workers that are going on strike to improve those working conditions for that unit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. And Robert, I'm assuming that your hand's up because of the prior comment, or did you have something else? Okay, so yeah. I'm not seeing any other hands up. Does anyone else have additional comments or questions or suggested language for D? Okay. Then we will go ahead and I think at this point, let's move just over to the paperwork piece and then dive back into the rest of the AAA items. So Seth, are you able to get that up on the screen?
Yeah, sorry, switching right now.
Yeah, no worries. So I wasn't planning on going section by section here, but just kind of briefly we'll describe what each of the sections are and then kind of talk a little bit about the fiscal parts that we put in there. But of course, welcome to any feedback on anything that we have in there from the committee, but thinking that's probably where we want to focus. So first section describes changes to the rules. The second section explains why we need to make the rule changes. That next section is that fiscal and economic impact statement. And so with that, we have determined that there is no fiscal impact that's caused by the rule changes themselves. Really, the only fiscal impact that we see is through the legislation that was passed via SB 916. And so that fiscal impact would be tied to the legislation, not to the rule changes. The other rule changes, we don't anticipate to have a fiscal impact because the rule doesn't isn't anticipated really to change the number of denying decisions into allowing decisions or allowing decisions into denying decisions. And we don't anticipate that the changes will result in claimants being unemployed longer. We do expect that the changes will make administration of the program a little easier. It'll also streamline what it means to be able, available, and actively seeking work. There might be a little bit of a fiscal impact, but it would be a de minimis one in our estimation relating to the changes in incarceration. But we will be monitoring that along with all these other changes to see if there's any unintended consequences. And so, just as a reminder about the incarceration piece, what's changing too is that if they're incarcerated for more than half the week, or if the claimant misses an opportunity for suitable work, they'll be denied benefits for that week. Next is the racial impact statement, and then the statement on the cost of compliance. Again, similar language here about the fiscal impact as we had above. And then the last section has the language for the proposed amended rules. And so I see Paloma, your hand is up. But any other comments, put your hand up and we'll take you after Paloma.
Yeah, so in the statement about fiscal and economic impact, were this a rulemaking only about Senate Bill 916, that might be sufficient. I don't think it is, given the actual content of the proposed rules, because it is much more expansive than that. And from what I have heard from employers, they see this rule as having a pretty significant economic impact, particularly with regards to the fact that we expect that people will remain on UI longer because of these changes. So we would argue that there needs to be more capturing of that in the statement. And I also I think this fiscal impact statement would lead people to the impression that all this rule does is implement Senate Bill 916. And I think that that creates a false impression. Also, would note that the statute requires a much more robust analysis of the impact on small businesses. So would urge the agency to take another look at that and the impact that that'll have on their resources and the administrative costs and labor costs that they may see.
Thank you, Paloma. Stacy.
Yeah, thanks. I will echo that, and I in some ways hesitate to do so because my hope is as we move into a conversation going back to the eligibility piece, that we might see some language changes that would mitigate the fiscal impact, particularly on our reimbursing employers. But absent that, I do really want to lift up Paloma's point that around the eligibility changes generally, those are pretty significant and go beyond the scope, I would say, of just 916, and they will have like an immediate and direct impact on school district costs.
Thank you, Stacy. Oh, Katie, did you have or?
I was just going to ask those folks to like just get in a little more detail, mostly just out of curiosity. But I think Stacy, you basically just answered it.
Oh, okay. Great. Paloma, did you have another? Okay. And so looking at I'll definitely take all of that back and we'll take a look at this language and see what we can do to, I'll take it back and talk to the team about it. Of course, I hear the concerns that you are raising about length of unemployment and that it'll have an impact on small businesses or possibly the school districts. When we were looking at these changes, we're not estimating that there's going to be, like I said, that all of a sudden there'll be a lot more allowing decisions versus denying decision, thus increasing the cost or the length of unemployment will extend. That's why we came to that 0 to, maybe a de minimis one on the incarceration piece, but that's why we put that statement in there. But definitely, based on that feedback, we'll take a look, take it back to the team. So thank you for that feedback. Stacy.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, bleeding into getting into, I think, the next portion of the conversation, but I'll just say, like,
Sure.
from our perspective, there's no rational, reasonable way to say if we're no longer requiring folks to actually meet work search requirements in order to qualify for UI, that are folks who would not actually need to seek additional employment over the summer. I mean, there's not a good reason to not claim that benefit that you've now become eligible for without needing to conduct those other activities. And so I think for us to say that you don't assume there will be an increase in the number of folks claiming does not make sense.
Okay, and you're talking about the employer attached changes, or
The 4 weeks.
The 4
Yeah,
weeks.
the 4 weeks.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And Paloma.
Yeah, I mean, I think the requirements of 183.336 are not captured here. The analysis of the impact on small businesses, it does require a more in-depth analysis. So I would ask that be done in more detail.
Alrighty. Any other comments or questions before we move back to rules? All right, thank you very much. Seth, let's go ahead and go back to the so here we talked through all of the changes last time, but I know they were kind of rushed and we were jumping around paperwork. We provided like a big giant chart in between, and hopefully the intent of that chart was to help everyone sort of maybe make it easier to read all of the changes, but I didn't have a specific like line by line agenda for going through all of these. Just kind of wanted to open it up to generally any of the topics in the changes to 0036. Any comments or further discussion or things that you've thought of since the last meeting? Stacy, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for the pause. This might be an error on my end. Trying to dig through my inbox and Outlook. I'm not seeing easily the chart that was sent out.
Oh, okay.
So that would be helpful. Thank you. And that could also just be user error on my part. Save my thoughts about Outlook to myself. But I will just say, not to be a broken record here, but particularly as many of us sat through multiple days of legislative hearings about the impact of HR 1 and what that is going to mean for the state budget and therefore our local budgets as we think about local governments. I really want to elevate the impact of that move away from the 4-week timeline for school districts in particular. We have districts that will already likely be bracing for future rifts in future biennia, if not this biennia, as state agencies are asked to put forward their 5% and 10% cuts lists. And so increasing that amount in a relatively unpredictable way that districts are going to be billed for over the summer for UI it feels like the wrong time to be doing that. It's going to put additional strain on our budgets outside of the collective bargaining process and what districts are able to negotiate at the table. It's going to make an already rough budget cycle that much harder. And I just implore the department to look at maintaining that 4 weeks as the baseline and creating, a pathway Paloma mentioned last time, similar to what Washington has. If there are employers that want to offer an extended period of, temporary unemployment or UI benefits for their folks who are employer attached, I think we need to make that the exception for those who want it, not the rule for everyone.
Thank you, Stacy. And someone should be emailing you again that chart here shortly. And we also have it posted on the website. The link is in the chat. And it's like 40 pages, so I don't expect you to read it, digest it. But after the meeting, if you have a chance to go through it, if that raises additional questions or answers things, feel free to reach out and let us know. Or, if you can multitask that well during the meeting, I'm all for it. But just realizing that it's a long document, and because we really wanted to go through and kind of map those out, because there's a lot of changes that aren't substantive. We're just moving something from one area to another. So hopefully that will help provide clarity there. Cynthia.
Hi, well, a couple of things. I will say it is a choice to be a reimbursed employer and reimbursing employer. So I do understand about districts and HR1, obviously. We're in the same boat. But I will also say that HR1 will also affect workers. In fact, it'll affect our lowest wage workers, which would be the folks that are seeking unemployment benefits because they want to make sure that they still serve the public in schools. So I do want to say that we could change the way we do things currently so that doesn't affect. So just putting that out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Cynthia. Allison.
I did have a couple of other questions, but I'm a little confused process-wise. So if I have a couple of questions about some other provisions other than the one that are up, is this the right time or is it a different time the right
Absolutely.
time?
Yes, sorry.
So I'll take it in the wrong
We've
direction
just
here.
got one on the screen, but we can move along. This is just sort of open for, and sorry because you weren't able to attend the other one. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome to
Okay. So just a couple, and
but just let us know where you're at so I can make sure everyone's
I didn't, my notes are not annotated exactly correctly, but for job seeking, so 5AA, we do have a concern that reducing the requirement to participate in some of those non-job application work contacts, specifically such as the job placement meetings or networking functions and things like that might increase the time that people are receiving unemployment benefits. And it does seem to me that those would be activities that would assist in finding individuals, help them find jobs faster. So we are wondering if there is still any opportunity to continue discussion about, which of those activities are excluded. And then I have a couple other questions too that are different.
Absolutely. So stick into that one and then we can move to the next one. So what we found here is really what gets folks back to work faster is those direct employer contacts. And the folks that are doing those contacts are sort of doing all these activities anyway. And so really it's just creating a administrative burden to record it every single week. Some are doing a lot more than this, others are doing less. We still advise them about where they need to be looking for work and what type of jobs they need to be seeking, what their labor market is. We still offer all of those job, the job trainings, resume building, all of those free services that we offer through our WorkSource Oregon offices. They are still required to register with iMatch Skills, or if they happen to be an out-of-state claimant, with their equivalent of that, so that we know who they are and that they're looking for work, and we can send them referrals for vacancies and things like that as well. So that's still a requirement. It's just in a different rule because that's where it sits. They have to register before this is more weekly claiming versus that initial registration. So that's not changing. And that was sort of the thought behind this, is it's sort of record keeping, and the folks that are doing those two work seeking activities are kind of doing this stuff anyway.
Yeah, I think to me that's pretty intuitive for some things like updating their resume, but there were activities in there that I just want to have on the record that we feel like would be helpful, particularly those networking functions and things like that, where it's where you're going to find the employers.
Mhm.
Another question is for individuals who might be on strike, but perhaps are picking up work elsewhere. Is there any clarification on how do we determine if they remain attached to the employer? Let's say that perhaps somebody was picking up maybe 40 hours of work a week elsewhere, and I understand they probably wouldn't qualify for unemployment for those weeks where they were working, but is there a point in time at which they would become unattached?
So there could be definitely, and usually employers or um, claimants are going to tell us that. So if they've returned to full-time work, they'll just stop claiming, or sometimes they do let us know, hey, I got hired. Or employers might say this person is, given notice, or they have actually separated, or we have decided to fire them. That's usually how we find those out in a continuous claim series. If they're just picking up odds and ends because UI is not covering their bills, and it's not 40 hours of work, they need to report hours and earnings each week that they claim. And so there is some amount of work that you can do where it won't impact your unemployment, but then there's um, if you make beyond that, or you make more than your weekly benefit amount, then you wouldn't qualify that week.
And let's say somebody did pick up that amount of work for a number of weeks, but let's say 3 weeks, right? That the fourth week, maybe they didn't. Would they still be considered employer attached in that fourth week?
They're still on strike, so they're still
This is
attached to that.
assuming,
No, yeah, no, it makes sense. So let's say the strike happens during the summer. They're listening to their, union, and what's being posted, and they're like, "Wow, we're in a deadlock." They're trying to get to the table, but I have a job opportunity for to work. I don't know. To work, some summer retail or something like that for 3 weeks, just a short-term job. We're not going to consider them separated unless we hear from either of them, like, I'm not going back. That would just be, they need to report their hours and earnings for those 3 weeks, and then week 4 they're back to the strike. Of course, we're still asking, are they able to return to work for their employer if the strike ends while they have that other job. We would kind of look at, like, are they willing to drop that other work, or if there's things with the employer that would allow them to finish that 3-week commitment. So those are very case by case situations, which obviously without the strike component, we deal with that now anyway. When we're looking at like multiple jobs or job offers or things that happen all in the same week, that's part of our regular business processes. So it would just sort of fold into that, if that makes sense. Okay. And I know you had a few different questions, so I just want to make
I
sure.
think that's good for now.
Okay.
Yep.
Susan.
Okay, so I just wanted to flag in this scenario that I just heard, I wanted us to flag a distinction. There may be a distinction between private sector work strike versus public sector strike. So in what the scenarios that I just heard was, if a striking worker were to seek employment while they were striking, then that would be problematic in the public sector, because striking is actually a protected activity through the Collective Bargaining Act and through PECBA. So they would actually lose protections, that protected status, if they were to seek employment while striking. It's my understanding. So I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of the question or the posed scenario is, what happens to in my case, public sector striking worker who seeks employment elsewhere? And that would be problematic because they would then lose their protected activity status under PECBA. So just want to flag.
No, I appreciate that, Susan. And that's why a lot of these individual scenarios are they're not going to fit all cases. And so when a strike occurs, we're going to be looking into, the specific, laws at play, the collective bargaining agreement and all of that. And so generally trying to keep what's written here to hopefully apply broadly, but then there might be, specifics given the nature, of the bargaining units and what the language actually is and what laws are at play that, impact some type of workers, but not others. And so if we needed to provide specific guidance to those individuals at that time of the strike, then we would do that. But wanted to have just something generally so people have an expectation of, what we're thinking about when it regards to strike, ahead of strike, so they can go into, bargaining, knowing that's kind of how we're going to interpret it. But like you said, if there's specific scenarios like that where you're like, actually, they can't because of this, then we could provide them with specific guidance around that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Paloma.
Just as an overall, as we've been having these conversations, I'm concerned about how much is sort of, well, we'll interpret it this way, or it might be this way. There's a lot that people aren't going to know the rules of the road, except as in communication with individual employees of the department. So I have some concerns about how much we're not saying about how things are going to work in these rules.
Thank you, Paloma. And the intent again is we'll have a website with information that, will apply to striking workers so that, employers and workers know what to expect. That language is easy to update versus like, we could, of course, if needed, do an emergency rule if we had to, but like updating website language or guidance when people file their initial claim is much easier to update than the rule language. And so if there was specific questions that we were getting or FAQs, that's normal for us to put up where they're like, well, what if in this scenario this happens or that happens? Then we would post that and make sure that people understand what is expected of them. But I hear your concern, so I just wanted to kind of add on. All right. Any other comments or questions or just general feedback or thoughts about any other part of or continued with striking workers or with 0036, any of the, not just what's on the screen, but any of the pieces? All right, Bob.
Just a quick question. Can you go over the timelines that are proceeding forward? What are the next steps and at what point?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Seth, can you go back to that slide? Just the slide with the timeline. I think it's slide 5. Looks like Seth might be having some technical difficulty, but generally what we have is October 24th is when we propose filing the rules for Secretary of State. And then November 4th through December 5th will be that public comment period. November 19th is what we're anticipating to be our public hearing. And then December 26th will be when we file the final rules with the Secretary of State. And then rules will become effective January 4th of 2026. There they are. Any questions or concern on that timeline? Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So now we've reached roundtable. Any roundtable items from members of the committee? Paloma.
What's our comment deadline for this process?
If we could get comments by end of day tomorrow, that would be.
Did she freeze for anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Yes, she appears to have frozen for everybody.
I believe what Lindsay was going to say is if we could get the information or feedback by end of day tomorrow, that would be helpful. But do let us know if you need an extra day or two.
I will probably ask for an extra day or two. But I'll follow up.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll offer some suggested language. I can send it to you to Paloma and Stacy, if that's helpful.
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. And this is more, I guess, just a question specific to the department, but I'll bring it up here since Cynthia mentioned, right, that our public employers don't have to be reimbursing employers, though they are by default. My understanding is that if an employer is going to switch from being reimbursing to tax paying, they're essentially locking themselves into that decision for a 2-year period before they can choose to stay or go back. I'm newer to this role, but I don't believe that we've ever really had a good analysis on the potential cost difference in one or the other, or what a district could anticipate as being their tax rate if they were to switch. So my question to our friends at the employment department would be, is that something that could be run with relatively little effort on the employment department's part, if we were to look at, and it would be hard because it would vary by district, but how hard is it for a district to get an analysis done of, if you were to switch, this is what your payroll tax rate would be?
So that is a very good question, and it is not something we could do instantly. It is something we could do, but right now we are in October, and we are in the middle of our experience rating season for tax-paying employers, and so that would naturally add additional time to any analysis that would take place.
It doesn't mean that we can't do it. It just means it will take us a little bit longer. And I cannot speak for my contributions in recovery colleagues, but I would say it's not something that would be easy, but it is also not something that would be difficult.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that because I just want to name that in the midst of other budget uncertainty,
Yes.
it is not a decision that districts would take lightly and would require some research to understand the pros and cons.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mhm. Any additional roundtable comments? Desperately hoping Lindsay would be back soon.
I guess I'll just say really appreciate all this work. I think all of us are very, you know, through our members or constituency groups, very affected by unemployment insurance, obviously, you know, and then obviously the specific to 916 piece. So just, I know it takes a lot of work from the staff. So really appreciate you all doing all of this work and pulling us together. And yeah, appreciate the conversations.
Certainly.
I share those same feelings as Katie. Thank you all for all of this.
We appreciate.
You all are doing a great job.
We appreciate everyone's participation. This is a time-consuming process, and I want to thank all of you who have joined us and have been willing to share your thoughts, concerns, to ensure that we are getting the best rule we possibly can. Before I move on to the questions for public comment, does anyone else have any additional roundtable items or anything else that they would like to bring up? I'm going to take that as a no. And Stephanie, do we have anyone with questions?
Not at this moment. If anybody would like to raise their hand as an attendee or public with questions, we'll go ahead and get you unmuted.
Thank you, Robert, for joining us.
And my apologies, my system decided it didn't know where the internet was. And so had to do a complete reboot. So thank you folks for stepping in, and apologies for me just leaving in the middle of the meeting. That was not my intent. So I assume we're still on roundtable.
Yep, we're accepting questions from attendees. No hands up so far.
Great, thank you.
Give it another minute or two.
Sounds good. Okay, I think we've given enough time. It looks like there are no additional comments or pieces of feedback. So I do want to again thank the committee so much for your active participation, for the great discussion, for all of your feedback, and just for your time in participating both in the October 2nd meeting and also this meeting as well. I really appreciate all your continued support. It's extremely valuable. And if you have additional comments, go ahead and supply those to the rules email at rules@employ.oregon.gov. We'll go ahead and take those through the end of the day tomorrow, unless Lisa promised you anything else while I was gone. Otherwise, with that, we'll go ahead and close the meeting. Thanks again, and I appreciate all of you. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you to our interpreters.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.